Hello and welcome back. This presentation gives an application of altmetrics to the particular case study of medical research funder impact. It's going to go through a comparison of the Medical Research Council, the National Institutes of Health and the Wellcome Trust in terms of altmetrics. These are three medical funding organisations: the UK medical research funding body, the Medical Research Council; the US equivalent, the National Institutes of Health; and the Wellcome Trust, which is a British private charity, but it's the second biggest medical research funder in the world. The data we have for these three publications and also for the world comes from three large relevant fields: medicine, biochemistry, genetics and molecular biology, and immunology and microbiology. So these three large fields and 4 years: 2013, 2014, 2015 and 2016. The table at the top records the number of articles from each funder and the world. In our sample, the data is scope of citations. For one comparison, Mendeley readers from Webmetric Analyst and Wikipedia citations from Webmetric Analyst for a random sample of 500 out of 5,000 articles. The world sample is not a complete set either. It's a set of a maximum of 1,000 per field in a year. So a maximum of 10,000 per field in a year, which is why the world group isn't much larger than the NIH group. At the time when this data collected, this was a Scopus limitation, 10,000 articles per year. This graph shows Scopus citation counts for the three funders compared with MNLCS scores. We've seen the same graph in a previous presentation. We can see that the world average is 1. We see the world average of 1, and we see that all three funders have citation impact above the world average in all 4 years. And the confidence intervals give us an idea about whether the differences between funders are statistically significant or not, and also show us that all the funders have impact statistically significantly higher than the world average for all years. And in this graph, we can't distinguish between the NIH and Wellcome because the confidence intervals overlap. And here's the same type of information, but for Mendeley reader count. So this is altmetric data, and you can see that the confidence intervals are narrower, especially for the most recent years. The more recent years, the data was collected in mid-2016, so it's not complete data for 2016. So it's very new data for 2016, and we can see much smaller confidence intervals for 2016 for Mendeley, but generally smaller confidence intervals. And for some of the years, we can see that there's no overlap between Wellcome and MRC. So whereas for Scopus citations they were interchangeable, for Mendeley readers we have more data, which enables us to make a clear decision that Wellcome has higher impact than MRC for some of the years anyway, for 2 of the 4 years. And this is a Wikipedia citation count MNLCS, so the same MNLCS as the previous graph, but for Wikipedia citation counts. I mentioned in the previous presentation that MNLCS does not work very well for Wikipedia citation counts because most of them are 0. So this would be a candidate for using the EMNPC. And you can see here that the confidence intervals are all very, very wide. So there's only two situations where the confidence interval is wide enough to make, 3, where the confidence interval is wide enough to make any decision. and that's that there are 3 cases where the confidence interval doesn't include 0. So we could conclude that for the year and funder, the impact was above the world average for those 2 funders and one of the 2 years for one, 2 for the other. This is a similar graph, but you can see narrower confidence intervals, this one and the previous one. And the difference is that we have 5,000 for the world set, we have 500 for the world set in this one, and then 500 for the world set in this one. So the bigger world set gives us narrower confidence intervals. So we can see the confidence intervals being much narrower in here because we've taken a larger world set. And if we combine the results for all fields and years, which we can do for the MNLCS, we can produce an average score overall and a confidence interval, 95% confidence intervals. And we can see in this table for the 3 funders, the scope of citations, confidence interval, 95% confidence interval, and average value. And for Mendeley readers, and for the Wiki 500 and the Wiki 500 divided by 5,000 for the world, we can see that the Wiki 500, we can't calculate confidence intervals because they're too wide. But when we get 5,000 for the world, we can calculate confidence intervals. And in 2 of the 4 cases for the final column, we have confidence intervals that exclude 1. So we have higher than the world average. The first one doesn't count. So for 2 of the 3 funders, we have confidence intervals that indicate statistically significantly higher impact than the world average. And we have that evidence for Scopus and for Mendeley overall. So these are the most powerful numbers overall because they combine all fields and years together. So if we want to know how well NIH, MRC and Wellcome are doing to compare them, then we can use these figures rather than any of the graphs because they take into account all the years and all the fields that we're looking at. And if we want to know whether, for example, Wellcome has scored higher than NIH, then we would look at either the Scopus or the Mendeley column, and in both cases the answer is yes. And in both cases the confidence intervals don't overlap, so the difference is statistically significant. So this is solid evidence to make decisions about the relative performances of the research funders in this aspect of their research anyway. And these are the same graphs for EMNPC, proportion cited. This is the proportion cited for Scopus citations, not a particularly useful graph because almost all of Scopus, a high proportion of articles are cited except in the final year. So we can see fairly wide confidence intervals at the end and overlapping confidence intervals as well. So not very useful. For Mendeley reader counts, also not very useful, overlapping confidence intervals. So we can't distinguish between the funders. Again, because the vast majority of articles will have Mendeley readers, including for the final year. And then this is the EMNPC for Wikipedia citation counts. So this is now more useful. Remember, the MNLCS for Wikipedia citation counts had only one confidence interval that didn't include 1. So all the results except for 1 were indistinguishable from the world average. But now we have lots of confidence intervals that do not include 1. So we have more powerful data, more times we would make the decision that the difference that a funder funds research with higher proportion cited than the world average. And this is the 500 and this is the 5,000, and we get even narrower confidence intervals, so we get more precise. Still not all confidence intervals don't overlap, but we have much better data than the original one, the MNLCS for Wikipedia. And if we combine all the fields and years for EMNPC, so we don't have a graph with lots of different points on, but we have one value for each funder and a confidence interval, then here are the citations, the Mendeley readers, and the 2 wiki scores. And you can see cases where there are none overlapping. For the important ones, the Wikipedia ones, we don't really care about Scopus and Mendeley because MNLCS is better for them. But for Wikipedia, the confidence intervals, do they always overlap? Yes, they do always overlap, but they don't always contain the world average. So we can see the NIH and Wellcome score higher than the world average for the 500 NPC, and same for the 5,000, the final column, and but all the confidence intervals overlap between funders, so we can't be sure which funder is the best of the 3 or has the highest score of the 3, but we can be sure that they're all above the world average in terms of proportion cited in Wikipedia according to the final column. And if you're interested, this is the field equalized proportion cited. So this estimates the proportion cited in each case. So for all funders, about 70% of the articles are cited. For Mendeley, for all funders, about 91% of articles have Mendeley readers. So these figures are very high, so they're not suitable for the EMNPC. But for Wikipedia, the funders have about 1.7, just about 2% cited with the Wiki 500 and about 2% cited with the Wiki 5000, because it doesn't, the world doesn't affect the percentage cited. So we can see very low percentage cited in Wikipedia, which is why the EMNPC is better than the MNLCS for them, narrower confidence intervals. So to summarize, we've seen that MNLCS is best for citations and Mendeley readers because there are fewer zeros. EMNPC is best for Wikipedia citations because there are many zeros, high proportion zeros. And the methods, if you choose the appropriate one, are powerful enough to give us statistical evidence of impact differences between groups when we're using the MNLCS, but not for Wikipedia except with the world average. And we can compare overall or trends over time. The overall comparison, the single number in the tables at the end, is the most powerful. And as an important point to remember, the methods work best for large groups of articles. If you only have small groups of articles, then the confidence intervals will be very wide. So thank you very much for listening. I hope that made some sense.